Hello, my name is Rosario. I'm a PhD student in biomedicine at the University of Granada, and I'll be presenting the results of this study, carried out by 5 different researchers: Dr. Peruk from the University of Trieste, Mr. Neuwirth from the University of Tübingen, and Dr. Navarro, Dr. Martos, and myself from the University of Granada. Collaborators from Panacea Cooperative Research, a spin-off from the University of Granada, including Dr. Ibáñez and Dr. Valsecki, developed the software that has been used, and Dr. Jankauskas from the University of Vilnius and his team recovered the remains on which this study was performed. In it, the main aim was to attempt to establish the identity of the unidentified remains using AI-guided craniofacial superimposition. Let's begin with some background information on this mass grave. It was discovered at the beginning of 2017 at the Upper Castle of Vilnius in Lithuania, and its excavation uncovered the remains of 21 executed leaders and participants of an anti-Russian revolution known as the January Uprising. This uprising took place in the 19th century between 1863 and 1864. After the remains were uncovered, identifications were carried out for a subsequent state reburial. These identifications were performed using a variety of methods, which included cross-comparison of all antemortem and postmortem data and genetic identification. Additionally, and due to the fact that photographs of some of the subjects believed to rest in this mass grave had been retrieved from historical archives, craniofacial superimposition was performed using automatic algorithms in order to validate the technology and compare the final decisions to those of the genetic analysis and other traditional identification methods under blind conditions. Throughout the craniofacial superimposition process, the researchers followed the best practices and methodological framework established by the MEPROX European Union project. This project, named New Methodologies and Protocols of Forensic Identification by Craniofacial Superimposition, served to define best practices and practices to avoid in craniofacial superimposition, as well as to standardize approaches towards a more objective and reliable technique. For the comparison of the antemortem and postmortem materials, skeleton ID software, developed according to the desired requirements devised by the MEPROX project, was used. In this table, you see the academic background and experience of all the participants that carried out this study. As you can see, participants number 4 and 5 were experts with broad experience in craniofacial superimposition. Participant number 3 had related training both in forensic anthropology and craniofacial superimposition, but no real case experience. And finally, participants number 1 and 2 were students from related health sciences, but with no specific training nor previous experience. The idea behind this setting was to try to establish how much the background and experience of the person attempting to perform identification through this technique can influence the decision they make. The materials used in the study were the 18 3D scanned skull models that had been acquired with a 3D structured light scanner, model GoScan20, and the 14 photographs of 11 candidates digitized using an Epson Perfection V700 scanner. These were loaded onto the Skeleton ID database, which allows storage and management of hundreds of antemortem photographs and skull models for later processing in the virtual lab. The table to the right contains information about the resolution and the quality for skull face overlay of the photographs used in this study. For the second stage, 18 pairs of facial and cranial landmarks were located on the following Capel and Stefan's 2015 nomenclature and definitions, as well as MEPROX Consortium's best practices. For the landmark location process, the software offers an array of tools such as 2-dimensional transverse auxiliary lines, a tool for setting the Frankfurt plane and a grid to visualize it, or the display of the skull in 4 simultaneous camera views that allow for variation among norma frontalis and norma occipitalis on the first screen, both profiles of norma lateralis on the second, and norma verticalis and norma basalis on the third one. The last screen shows the free camera view, where landmarks can also be located and adjusted. After the photographs and the skull 3D models had all the landmarks placed, the skull face overlays were obtained by the processed SFO automatic algorithm developed by Dr. Valsecki and collaborators, which performs a series of polynomial equations to approximate the cranial landmarks to their facial homologues and find the best possible fit, delivering results in only 78 milliseconds, which implies a serious advantage over previous solutions or manual CFS. In order to approximate the landmarks, the algorithm needs data regarding the average distance of soft tissue in between each pair of landmarks. For this purpose, Carl Stefan's 2014 facial soft tissue depth study for world population was used. Afterwards, manual refinement was performed in all cases in which each researcher deemed it necessary according to the previous training and knowledge on craniofacial anatomy. The tools provided for this purpose in Skeleton ID are essentially focused on rotating, translating, scaling, and projecting the 3D model over the photograph. Other information that can be included or estimated at this stage are the camera subject distance, focal length, and main point of the photograph. Additionally, there are tools to adjust the transparency and perform wipes of the projected 3D skull model in order to better assess the correspondences, which can be useful both in the evaluation of the skull face overlay and in the refinement for better adjustment. The soft tissue depth consistency can be evaluated using a tool comprising 3D colored cones that illustrate the spatial relationship of landmark pairs and have an adjustable orientation and a size that's determined by the statistical values of the soft tissue depth study used. Any values in the green area of the cone will be within the mean depth plus minus the standard deviation, and in the yellow area it will be within the mean depth plus minus 3 times the standard deviation. For the last stage, the evaluation of each skull face overlay, that is, each skull against each photograph, and the assessment of the anatomical consistency between the face and the skull features, 4 different families of criteria, as exemplified by the MEPOX consortium, were used. Those are the concordance between the outlines and contours of the face and the skull, the positional relationship of anatomical structures, the evaluation of asymmetries, and the evaluation of soft tissue depth consistency. The tools for wipe transparency and visualization of the soft tissue by 3-dimensional cones described previously were used. This table shows the different criteria grouped in the 4 criteria families I just mentioned, so if you want to find out more about the relationships that we are observing when performing an evaluation, you can just pause the video for a second to read them. Then, after the evaluation of all the criteria is done for all the skull face overlays of each case, a degree of support is given to the decision corresponding to this gradual scale. Therefore, taking into consideration the consistencies or inconsistencies noted, the decision will be provided in accordance with the quality and the quantity of the analyzed materials. This means that in those cases where we have the complete skull with mandible, sufficient dentition to evaluate occlusion, and at least 2 photographs in different poses, meaning a lateral view and a frontal view, for example, and provided that they are of sufficient quality, then we may have strong support to the assertion that the photographs and the skull belong to the same person, which would be a positive identification, or that they did not, in which case it would mean exclusion. Here we are presenting the performance of the 5 researchers that have taken part in this study. They are divided in 3 groups according to the degree of support given to each decision. In the columns after the participant number, we see the number of positive cases out of 9 in the total number of decisions made, followed by the true positive and false positive ratios, the number of negative cases out of 189 in the total number of decisions made, and the true negative and false negative ratios. There is a considerably high accuracy in true positive and true negative classification among the 3 experts, with a mean of over 90% correct decisions, and for the students, the correct classification of true positives and true negatives is just below 35%, with unexpectedly bad results in decisions made with a strong support. Here you see each participant's identification results compared to the results obtained by the genetic analysis, which appears in the first column, post-mortem ground truth. The main difference between the identification results obtained in decision-making between anthropologists and the students seem to lie in the knowledge and previous experience in craniofacial superimposition. The 3 anthropologists had a specific background in physical and forensic anthropology, with knowledge of craniofacial anatomy and previous experience in solving cases. In contrast, although both students received training materials on the CFS technique, neither had previous forensic anthropology academic background or experience with the technique. This may have led to worse results. It should be noted that the identification process was approached in the first instance as a closed scenario by participant 5, who was the first participant to address the cases and complete the study, where the 11 individuals in the photographs had to be among the 18 analyzed skulls. However, investigations by Dr. Jankowska's team in parallel with this study revealed that this was not the case. The skulls corresponding to subjects Antemortem 1, Antemortem 12, and Antemortem 19 were not among the 18 3D models provided to the participants. Thus, the 2 cases classified as false positives by participant 5 were decided based on the few criteria that could be positively correlated, considering the low quality of the photographs and their consistency among the 18 skulls available. Subsequently, the rest of the participants were previously informed to address the identification problem as an open scenario where the subjects of the photographs could not be found among the 18 skulls provided. It's also important to highlight the fact that a positive decision in terms of limited support within the MEPROC scale should not be taken as evidence of identification, but rather as complementary support to guide future research. It is worth mentioning the case of subject Antemortem 4, whose provided photograph portrayed his brother, even though he was not the individual depicted in the photographs. Participants 3, 4, and 5, as well as Dr. Jankowska's, reached the same conclusion and assigned the same skull, K12P18, to it with a limited to moderate degree of support. One of the possible reasons behind this could be that since they were brothers, the facial morphology could have been very similar, and considering the low quality of the antemortem image used for comparison, the analyzed general morphological criteria could have shared similarities. Although some studies have attested the likeness of craniofacial morphology in twins, based on our own knowledge, no research has been conducted concerning skull face comparisons among siblings, offspring, or close family members. It's important to point out that the results obtained in this study suggest that both the quality of the materials used and the previous experience of the analyst play a fundamental role when reaching conclusions using this technique. However, the results obtained by the experts are extremely promising, and they illustrate the huge potential of the implementation of AI-guided software to human identification, as more developments towards the automation of the different steps of this process and the validation of the techniques are on their way. In this study, many drawbacks had to be overcome related to the materials used, increasing the difficulty of the scenario even further, and quite certainly negatively impacting the decision-making stage. No access to the original skulls was granted, only to the 3D models. The teeth were not visible in the photographs, preventing from dental comparison. Only one photograph in one pose was available for 10 out of the 11 subjects, and the photographs that were used were old, over 150 years old, so there was no metadata associated to them, no known camera model or focal length, and the quality of some of them was not sufficient for CFS. The results obtained seem to advise cautious use of the technique when the quality and quantity of the materials is not adequate, but they also suggest that it's a reliable technique in cases with an acceptable or good quantity and quality of the materials, and in cases with unusual morphological features, as an asymmetry, for example. All these limitations can be easily overcome nowadays, thanks to the widespread use of cameras in smartphones. It seems logical to think that in contemporary cases, we might be able to access dozens of recent digital photographs, including the camera parameters, and also in different poses with sufficient quality and even with partially visible dentition for dental comparison. Please feel free to contact me at the address below or go to Skeleton ID Resources Research if you'd like to read more about our research. Feel free to ask any questions. I am looking forward to hearing any thoughts and seeing everyone's presentations. Thank you for your time.